to start off the evening today, I would like to welcome our first speaker. From our DLC Global HR Committee, Dr. Adil Malia, CEO and partner, the firm, a thought leader, a passionate and engaging keynote speaker, facilitator, and trainer for prominent business houses globally, a former group president of the HRSR Group and director Coca-Cola, bestowed with a Cosa honorary doctorate in philosophy, and the quintessence of his journey is based on the prime learning one first needs to be a good person and everything else follows. Something I couldn't agree with much more. Welcome, Dr. Malia.
Thank you, Della Leadership Circle, for having invited me to be out here. Thank you, my friend Jimmy Mistry, for inviting. Thank you, Pearl. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for investing your time to come and spend interesting Friday evening time to discuss a very critical subject, but not so critical to be spending Friday evening trying to listen to some kind of an academic mumbo jumbo, because I'm going to be talking to you about anti-fragile leadership. Now, that sounds like some formula for nuclear bomb or something, anti-fragile leadership. And I'm going to talk about as to why in the changing world that we are trying to be facing, normal leadership is going to flop out. And therefore, what you really need is something called anti-fragile leadership, particularly when the kind of times that we are sharing are acutely disruptive times. So therefore, in these acutely disruptive times, your normal leadership models are bound to fail because that's abnormal. So what really works is something which we are going to shock and talk about, and that's called anti-fragile leadership. Very cutely, someone is rightly quoted that ये ख्वाहिशों की मंजिल भी कमबख्त कुछ अजीब है, वहीं से गुजरती है जहां रास्ते नहीं होते. Just when you thought that you were succeeding, and suddenly comes a point when you say, oh God, I thought I was succeeding. What happened? Everything else tends to fail out. And that's the reality of the situation. Volatility, as one understands, is a natural response to any acute disruptive situation. We all know that when there is an adversity or an acutely disruptive situation, volatility is a natural outcome. At that point of time, we have all been said that, okay, so what? Adversity is bound to come. It's a reality of life. You're supposed to learn how to handle it. But at that point of time, each one of us, enduring is one thing. The question that we need to be asking is, have we ever explored an alternative, which is going to be, how do we benefit from volatility? And what about trying to thrive on chaos and try to create leadership models for successful businesses? Because times like adversity are going to keep coming. They are going to hit your businesses every now and then. At that point of time, how are we going to ensure that businesses thrive on chaos? Because chaos is going to be natural. What can you do about it? Can we create value out of chaos? And that's the new leadership model that we are talking about. And that's the emerging model that world is talking about. That's the emerging model Talib is talking about, is about a reference to the post-COVID that I was told to talk about. But I would say, why COVID? COVID is only one event that has happened in the adversity of the life, but there would be many, many, many such adversities which are going to strike us. At that point of time, it is not only the ability of trying to see how we can cope with COVID that is important. What is important is, how do we succeed in managing all kinds of adversities which are going to come? Because haven't we realized we have actually forgotten COVID because we are now much more bothered about the Ukrainian war? And suddenly COVID seems to be okay, tha kuch saal tak band hua tha. But now we are back to the reality of facing another adversity which is going to hit us in every possible way. Now, very important I'm going to be talking about is that we live in a world of punctuated equilibrium. We all understand the concept of punctuations, commas, full stops, pauses, etc., etc. But we live in a world of punctuated equilibrium. If you look at evolution of life or evolution of world, you know, by the way, most people don't know how old, what is the age of Earth. If someone was to ask you, how old is Earth? What would be your answer? So for those who may not know and want to do some wild guessing, don't waste your time. The Earth is 4.543 billion years. Now, in this 4.553 billion years, it is not that change has never happened, or 300 years that we are talking about of the last industrial world that we are talking is the only period of time where change has happened. For all through the evolution of mankind, change has been happening. But change happens for most period of time in a very, very slow pace. So if you were to draw a graph of change, it would go like something like this: slow, 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 slow change. And that slow change will go on for 100 years, 200 years, 400 years. And then it would be followed by a small wedge. And in that small wedge, so many changes would happen that by the time you realize what happened, the old changes you won't realize. And suddenly new changes come and new technologies develop. And by the time you come to hands with that, yet another thing comes up. And that is the pace at which, within a short span of the wedge, changes happen at such a quick pace that you don't even realize what's happening. And around this pace or around this time in the wedge develops a predominant technology. And around this predominant technology which emerges in the wedge, 1,000,000 years again sustain till yet another wedge comes and similar fast-paced changes happen. So that is how you see how the world had and experienced different ages: Stone Age, Iron Age, Paper Age, etc., etc. So when you talk about ages, you are talking about that period in the wedge when such frequent changes suddenly happened that it totally redefined the way in which life was happening prior to that. And during the wedge, when the technology got developed, the life and its paradigm changed. Now, that is what we call paradigms, right? Paradigms are what? What are paradigms? Paradigms are rules, tools, models, styles, beliefs that succeed at a given point of time. So, prior to the wedge, there is a different paradigm, and the paradigm changes everything. All the rules, all the tools, all the models, all the styles, all the beliefs, all of that change. And therefore, that is what is called paradigm shift. Now, what is very important about paradigm shift is that when paradigm changes, everything becomes zero. All the rules, all the tools, all the models, all the styles, all the beliefs that you were prevailing become zero because they don't operate. You would have experienced all your business models, all your tools you were using, none of these give you the results that they were giving, and therefore it zeroizes itself. And therefore, the need for world to redesign itself and to redefine its elements to see how, what are the new rules, what are the new tools, what are the new models, what are the new shifts, what are the new styles, what are the new beliefs that will prevail and start giving the results that you're looking about. So it's very simple. You redefine all of that. But the unfortunate reality is that the human mind, which is a pattern driven thing, is fooled by two things. One is the randomness of our past successes. Just because human mind has succeeded in the past, it tends to keep repeating, despite knowing the same pattern of responding, even during the paradigm shift period, thinking that because it has succeeded in the past, that is going to succeed again in the future. And therefore, you are fooled by randomness belief that you should continue to do the same old thing which helped you to succeed in the past. And therefore, that randomness is one of the reasons why in the paradigm most old organizations tend to fail. The second critical thing that fails out is the fact that there is a great amount of belief, confidence that the strategy and the actions that you had developed are actually invariably to be applied even in the change environment, which is what most people believe, that if I have succeeded in the past due to certain reasons, we tend to forget the fact that there are unlimited and untold number of events and circumstances in the environment which coincidentally had conspired to provide a situation where your strategy collated with those environmental factors and gave you the results you wanted. You tend to apply the same strategy and the same action without understanding the change you need to bring in, as a consequence of which, the next time over, the universal factors unknown to you, which had conspired the first time, don't necessarily conspire the second time, and then you fail. So, this belief, which is a dying belief into your own confidence that your style and your strategy and your action is right, is one of the two reasons why organizations in changed environments also fail out. All right, so that's very, very important. We spoke about living in a world of punctuated equilibrium, and we spoke about the two factors and how you should redefine it, how you should change it, that we spoke about. Now, the most important factor that we want to talk about is called the Black Swan event. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of Black Swan. Is everybody aware of what Black Swans are? The world believed for the longest period of time that all swans are white. For centuries and centuries, the world believed, and therefore all theories about ecology, all theories about colorization, pigmentization, and everything was based on one assumption that all swans are white. Unfortunately, around 1673, two Australian ecologists found an entire colony of swans which were black. And that changed the entire theory of what the world was all about, what ecology was all about. And therefore, at that point of time, it became an event which was thereafter named as a Black Swan event. There are three things that happen in a Black Swan event. Number one is it takes you by a surprise, and thereafter you will see many Black Swan events. Takes you by a sudden surprise when it hits you. Number two is it has a huge impact when it hits you. When it hits you, there is a huge impact. Suddenly, everything you realize, oh my God, COVID. Oh God, never imagined. Suddenly, surprise. And the impact of that event is very high. And the third characteristic of a Black Swan event is that suddenly, when it hits you, there is a huge realization in the hindsight that actually, by logic, I am able to explain why this event happened. So, what is surprising is that you are using the logical pattern to explain the event in the hindsight of how it happened, but you are not having the ability to use the same logic forward to be able to predict when that event is happening. So, when the subprime event happened in 2008, the entire world could subsequently explain as to what subprime was about, why did subprime happen, what happened with the banking industry, what happened with the housing industry. But no one, by the same logic, could have used the same logic in 2005 to say, if this logic and pattern works, in 2008, you would have a subprime. And that is the unfortunate happening of the Black Swan event. Now, what is the problem? The problem is that in the older world that we used to live in, there were once in a while these Black Swan events happening. But the world that we are living in is getting redefined from one Black Swan event to the other Black Swan event at a very, very fast pace. And that is what we are worried about. Now, naturally, what happens in a Black Swan event when Black Swan event suddenly hit? For a minute, want to believe that COVID is a Black Swan event, just keep that as a parallel in your mind. Leadership starts getting collapsed. All your old systems, your processes, your everything fails. People fail, programs fail, sciences fail. And most importantly, in such kind of movements, leadership tends to fail and leadership collapses. Now, there are three kinds of leaderships you got to be mindful about. One is fragile leadership. The other is robust and resilient leadership. And the third is anti-fragile leadership. Now, what is fragile leadership and which we have experienced so many times? I've experienced in Coca-Cola when when the pesticide issue came in. We have experienced in several other companies. We have seen in the world over when a lot many changes happen. Leadership is fragile, which was very happy in the successful running of the company when everything was normal. But when adversities hit, they become fragile. They fall down, they break. And that is fragile leadership. The second leadership is called robust leadership or resilient leadership, which means leadership has the ability and is strong enough to fight the adversity and try and catch back to what was lost when the adversity hit you, and then continue the journey till the next, till whatever the point of the journey they wanted to reach to. So they are able to rise again after falling down and catch the journey and move on. But the changing times are different. The changing times are times when you require anti-fragile leadership, which predominantly means gaining from disorder, growing when exposed to volatility, outperforming under stress. And that is the leadership which says, lovely, now I have got adversity. I'm not going to go back. I'm going to go to a place far more different with higher results. And that is where I want to go. And that's the kind of leadership that the world is going to be requiring at that point of time. Very important to note that, take for example, look at the hydra. If you cut one head of hydra, it doesn't die. It grows few more heads and grows much more. unlike the other animals which you cut the head and it will be finished off. So at that point of time, growing under stress becomes very, very important. When leadership fails, it is called fragile leadership. When leadership, most companies today, what are they trying to do? I ask most of my clients, they are all trying to say that now when we have started and the lockdown has been brought down, how do we get back and start achieving what we have achieved in the past? Can we start the journey and move on to where we had left it on 21st March 2019? And can the journey restart? All right, you're very, very robust. You are very, very resilient. You are catching it up. But that is robust leadership. Anti-fragile leadership, which is required, is can we look at the entire universe and the learnings that we have had in this 2 years' time, which tells us how the new technology can be used? Do we really require infrastructure? Do we really require tall structures? Do we really require infrastructure in the organization? Or can people work from any locations? And so many questions which will redefine the way the businesses will be growing in the future. So, anti fragile leadership is what is the prescribed norm for the world that is changing. You require leaders who are of the right kind, and then freedom to the leaders to be able to lead and build anti-fragile organizations. So let's look at what are the things you see, the 6 or 7 things you need to see in anti-fragile leaders. What are the qualities and calibers of people who are the leaders in the anti-fragile time? So number one is you require a tremendous amount of action orientation, which you get to see from leaders so that they don't enter depressive states under pressure. So when you select your leaders now, you got to understand that all your other qualities and all your other assessment points are useless. You got to see action orientation under pressured conditions, stress testing for action orientation when the pressure is very high. The second is judgment under ambiguity and volatility. Because things are going to be so ambiguous, are leaders able to use judgment with limited set of informations, with a limited window and the view that they are going to be able to see? That is going to be a very important question. So when you are assessing your leadership, it is very necessary to see whether they have that judgment or they don't have that judgment under ambiguity. Third is short-term focus, long-term purpose. Keeping the long-term purpose in mind, short-term is not bad, and this is what the whole anti-fragile leadership is bringing about. Because if you are not alive in the short term, long term is only a theory. So how do you succeed to live in the short runs is going to be a very, very critical deliverable for leadership in the anti-fragile kind of leadership situation that we are going to face. Ability to detect black swans under Pareto monsters. Pareto monsters are the big problems which are lying on the tables of leaders. Each one of us has got 3, 4, 5 big problems which take 80% of time and resources. But right hiding under these Pareto monsters are those small black swans which you are not detecting because your focus is on the Pareto monsters. And as a consequence of which, when these little black swans become the big black swans that you're talking about, they bring you catastrophe. The ability to identify these black swans ahead of time is one of the most important things that critical anti-fragile leaders will be contributing to. Ability to do not structured innovation, but trial and error innovation, which is going to be another skill for the future that you need to develop in your organization. Absolutely a learning mindset, because every theory that you know of is going to be failing, every theory you know of is changing, and therefore continuing to have the learning mindset is very critical contributor to a success for a leader. And the last is business oriented empathy, organizational flourish beyond happiness. Happiness, everyone is talking about in a very big way, fashionable to talk about happiness. What is very important and emerging as very critical is the flourish part of it. What do I care for when I don't put pressure under you and I pay you the salaries that you want as leaders, but I don't put a pressure on you? I don't get any deliverables from you. He's very happy. No one is asking him questions, no one is telling him anything. But the most important thing is that the organizations are going to work on flourish and not happiness, because your happiness, when it starts contributing to the enterprise success and to the enterprise value creation journey, it is only then that the enterprise flourishes. So happiness is good, but enterprise flourish is one of the most critical contributors for the leadership model. And therefore, coming to the last part, what do they need to do to build organizations which have ability to cope with anti-fragile qualities? Number one is very tight structures, flat hierarchies, more empowerment, which is very obvious, because this one thing that organizations have realized, we don't need so many people in the value creation journey, is one realization 80% of the companies have come to. Because when they were operating from home and online, they realized that actually value addition is only coming from a few people out there in the hierarchy, and everyone else was sitting in meetings, not really adding value, but adding to a lot of airtime. And that realization that you require flat organizations, not so many people, is going to be the reality of what the organizations are going to look like. Systems that get better when under pressure, you have to design those kind of systems. Distilled decision making based on data without clutter. We have collected data and data and data, and mindless number of data that we have got. But that data with clutter, which does not help you to take acute decision making, is the antithesis of anti-fragile leadership. And therefore, how do you distill your data and get to the core data that you require to take decision is very, very important. Upskilling, reskilling is necessary, and contemporary technological distillation of your value chain. That's the last point I have to share. How do you distill your value chain on an ongoing basis with the prevailing technology? Now, for example, you've got digital technology. Now, digital technology should be used to filter your entire value chain from the basic point to the final customer point to see how value is created in the new environment. Now, that is a very tall order. I was told to do this entire thing and exercise within 30 minutes of time, trying to give you some snatches of what the organizations need to be doing, what kind of leaders we need to have in anti-fragile leadership environment. And this is what I thought I would share with you. We could certainly go around talking about it at a later point of time. Question coming to your mind is it a tall order? Yes, it is a tall order. But the question is, again, a quote that tells you the answer to it. हासिल होंगे वो ऊंचे मकाम, तू पहला कदम रख के तो देख, फिर जलेंगे वो बुझे चिराग, तू चिंगारी बन के तो देख. Become the spark, take on to the journey, and surely you're going to succeed in the changing environment. Thank you, Luke.